Dr. Aldo Flores-Quiroga, former Deputy Secretary of Energy for Hydrocarbons in Mexico and visiting professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. Also, apparently, University of Texas is now the wealthiest university in the world, beating out Harvard, because the University of Texas happens to own a lot of land in West Texas, where all that nice shale oil is produced. Dr. Aldo, putting on your former hat, Secretary General of the IEF, former Deputy Minister of Mexico, can oil producers afford to be all for one and one for all and ignore their customers, ignore their stakeholders that extend beyond their customers, maybe even their bodyguards?
What a question. Great to see you again. No, of course they cannot ignore their consumers. But I think that the broader issue here has to do with trying to find some certain ground in an environment in which so much is shifting, right? It's very difficult to read right now the direction of the market because the signals we're receiving are so mixed. So my interpretation is that this is much more of a search for stability. I concur with Jorge that this is also about finding a price that sustains domestic investments, some of very ambitious development strategies, military spending as well. And this justifies such an approach. Will this mean more coordination among producers? Well, not beyond the one that we're seeing already, I don't think. And I just see that this is a market that is going to be more competitive as uncertainty increases, but it's going to be still, it's for the time being, somewhat tight.
So your thoughts there? I mean, we are now going into COP, right? We're at oil industry a year ago coming out of COP26 looked like it was on its knees in terms of its public profile and its outlook, with the policymakers around transition being very much in the ascendancy. Now we go into COP28, 27, the shoe seems to be on the other foot. Energy security is the top priority. And I welcome your thoughts again from this point of view of the consequence. Is there a legacy consequence for the energy, the oil and gas industry to be so defiant in this moment? Can they get away with it, or could they, coming into a COP27, the challenge for climate, face even more, more harsh regulatory oversight?
Let's think back to the COP of last year.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very similar environment with high oil prices and energy prices. And I remember saying then, it's odd because these prices should be very attractive for the development of renewables and clean energies. And we didn't see any standing ovation during the COP meeting last year in Glasgow. For such a situation. On the contrary, we saw even calls for greater oil production. And this is the schizophrenia that Jorge was referring to. On the one hand, policy disincentivizing this investment. On the other one, they were asking, please give me more supply because I need to get through this storm of high prices. So we're going in a very similar situation with one great caveat, which is, of course, the geopolitical moment. And I think this will, clearly, the drive to find substitutes is now stronger than before. And this means substitutes in terms of cleaner energies. So we're going to be hearing more speeches around that, probably witnessing some agreements that we were not able to see last year. But then again, whether they bite is still a big question, right? We've been listening to this type of statements for decades already. And whatever comes from the COP process is still not reflected fully from those agreements into what countries are doing. And one more thing, this is obviously related to the issue of affordability. last year, when we heard also this type of mixed messages. I remember the energy minister of India saying, I still have to provide energy to my to the Indian population, and there's no reason why I should be paying more for it, just because I have to promote renewables along the terms of what, I don't know, Europe or the US is doing. So I think this is going to be, again, a strong part of the debate, and it's not going to be conclusive.
I wanted to get your thoughts. Obviously, Mexico, South America, very big a runoff election coming in Brazil. We had the two main actors in a fairly robust debate over the last few days. Where is South America's journey this year? Where is it ending up? And how significant will the outcome of the Brazilian presidential election be?
The region has been shifting leftwards politically throughout the last 2 to 3 years. This year is a consolidation of that trend. The left,
if Lula wins, it is. If
Lula
loses,
wins, for sure, it's that consolidation. Then again, it's a left with various shades of pink. In this case, it's not all in all cases the same. What's interesting is for the oil industry is that both presidents, like now in Colombia, President Petro, but also candidate Lula, certainly what Mexico has been doing, they are talking about reviewing the rules of the industry, of that game. So if Lula wins and follows on his campaign statements, we can expect some adjustments to the relationship between the state and Petrobras. That doesn't mean something like the adjustment we have seen, for example, in Mexico, but it means some necessary, given the statements, some necessary review to what that means and to what policy might entail. In Colombia, we're having a government that has also a president that during the campaign spoke strongly against fossil fuels. Whether he can manage the type of transition that he mentioned fast enough, we have yet to see. So it's what I see is a contested space for energy policy, partly because of the region's own ideological inclination and partly because of the effects of what we're seeing in Europe. So I think we're living through the transition of the transition of energy policy.
I think the big question of the China piece, the more robust China piece, is South America. Latin America, like the Russian nuclear crisis with the Cuban Missile Crisis of the early 60s, when the Russians tried to put some missiles in Cuba, and that created a big moment. The Chinese have been, like they have in Africa, becoming quietly very embedded in particularly Central America, but also South America. I'm wondering, what's your takeaway from the China Congress, the new King Xi, and what that means for the relationships in South and Central America, and then vis-a-vis the US?
It depends on which countries we're talking about. Remember that South America was very, experienced a boom, a commodities boom with the Chinese economic growth. And that will not change if China begins to open up and continue to grow. I mean, so that relationship is close. What's still an open question is where the pace of investment of China in the region will remain where it is. And that owes both to aspects of the economic cycle across the Pacific, but also to this restructuring of the relationship between the US and China, the new terms and the accommodation that will happen. And that means that the US will also be expecting some form of alignment from the countries in the Americas in this new shaping of the international order. So it's going to be business-wise. I think they're going to be benefited by this by the return to growth if it happens in China, and we know that many people don't expect it to be.
I mean, there's even plans, or I don't know how advanced or real they are, the Chinese have in Central America of building an alternative to the Panama Canal, for example. So these are not insignificant intentions, and consequently monumental in their geopolitical friction that they would cause. Are any of those pieces likely to emerge in the near future as being?
They are extremely expensive. That one in particular, I mean, these are projects that have been mentioned for at least a century
Right.
or more. So it's still hypothetical. And I think it's going to be getting even more difficult owing to this geopolitical competition, this Cold War between the US and China. It's going to be very difficult for Central American countries and some of the South American countries, say Brazil maybe, to basically go, have the same relationship with China. It's going to be the pressure on them is going to be such that a close alignment with the US will be necessary.